Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. We have an entire network of shows here at Security Weekly. You can subscribe at securityweekly.com/subscribe. We are in all the podcast catchers, all the podcast things, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those. You can find all our feeds there. You can subscribe to our mailing list, our Discord server, follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. On April 14th, learn how to monitor your Wi-Fi network for attacks with Enzyme, a free and open source wireless intrusion detection system. Leonard, who is one of the primary authors of the open source project, will be there, as well as Larry and myself. Alan Stakalakis, that's how I like to say his name because I think it sounds good. Alan Stakalakis and Tyler Robinson and Paul Sidorian on April 21st will learn how to gain visibility into your enterprise with Sysmon. Live attendees of both of these webcasts will have a chance to win a $100 Hacker Warehouse gift card. You only need your name and email address to register, and we don't share that with anyone. Register online at securityweekly.com/webcasts. All righty. And now, the security news. Do we want to start with Russia and Ukraine related news? Is that that seems to be still dominating the news feeds? Yes. No?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, yeah.
Entirely. Tyler, go with it, Tyler.
Go, Tyler. We're calling on Tyler.
Where do we start? Between the many wipers that we're seeing for kinetic damage to countries, and I would say anonymous hacktivists on both sides targeting each other. There's a lot going on. Currently, the Ministry of it's MID. I don't remember what MID stands for anymore. But they've put out a threat for it's the foreign ministries, a threat around something coming in the next day or so. So we will see how that goes. The hacker team there is looking to be making some noise, which is a big deal because the president or Russian minister actually controls that department, which is Putin. And if that threat is, I would say, empty, then people lose careers, lose lives, lose jobs. So I imagine there's a lot of people that are going to be actively trying to do this and maybe have not made promises that they can't deliver on based on their ability to stay alive and have a job. So, interesting things coming down the pipe right now.
Was Lee, our stories, are those the same story or different ones? I had the Viasat modems in Ukraine.
I've got that one
are
too.
Still under active attack.
And both telcos are actually under active attack. There's been botnets that we've been tracking for many days now, but the last 2 days there has been successful downtime, and what's causing those is still not 100% clear. There's a couple, that we got packet captures. We're looking at all the data, but there's interesting things where there's very small amount of packets that are causing disruption and maybe traffic coming from interesting locations. So it's not a good time, and there's usually something leading up to that when some of this happens for disruption.
Yep. So Paul, the Viasat ones, we talked about the Viasat stuff a little while back, and we're starting to get more information about it. From my understanding, it looks like that some of the attackers were able to infiltrate a third party for Viasat, and as a result, were able to push modified firmware to the Viasat modems, the end devices, and effectively bricked them.
Interesting.
And Viasat's solution was to replace 30,000 modems. So this was just not a Ukraine problem. It was a larger global problem.
Mm-hmm.
So they shipped new modems, but from what we're hearing now is that the attackers that crippled those Viasat modems the first time are still active within the networks.
Mm-hmm.
So like they didn't eliminate the root cause. And the attackers are still in and potentially have the ability to leverage other attacks and maybe even the same attack on these new modems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's an access mechanism and sounds like a missing firmware integrity check that's happening.
Yep.
My initial reaction was, they've been planning that for some time because to create firmware that does different stuff takes a little bit of engineering time.
Mean,
however,
I would argue that in this case, the firmware that does different stuff doesn't really need to do a whole hell of a lot.
It needs to brick the device.
Yeah,
right.
Empty instruction set.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Overwrite the bootloader. I mean, there's a lot of easier ways that take a lot less engineering time to cause a denial of service.
Yeah.
Usually in trying to reverse engineer the firmware or do custom firmware, you end up with bricking the device.
Perfect.
So, there you go.
I mean, that's easy.
Yeah.
And the new firmware could be effectively really small because they don't need any user land binaries if they're going to muck with the kernel just to make the damn thing crash on start. Like this becomes a really easy solution.
I would just, if it were me, I would deliver firmware with all the pieces there except for the kernel. that would be enough to brick the device.
Well, I mean,
who needs a file system?
It's a kernel.
Just modify UEFI boot parameters to just not tell it where any of the file systems are.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Can you map that to dev null?
You could map it to something that doesn't exist.
In embedded systems, IoT devices, typically, right, the bootloader has like an offset of where to load the kernel from.
Just change those addresses and you're all done.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you want to send something small, it's over satellite, have big impact. I mean, all theoretical at this point here.
Right.
But you're looking at the initial attack. It was a VPN misconfiguration on the part of the third party that allowed them access to gain to those networks. So, like
VPN misconfiguration or CVE.
Misconfiguration.
What? That never happens.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find the quote.
Compromise.
Yeah, breached via misconfigured VPN appliance.
Wait. Misconfigurations never happen. I don't know what you're talking about.
Misconfiguration of auto updates or misconfiguration of not turning on MFA and having creds breached.
It doesn't say. The article was
a missing patch misconfiguration. Like there's a RCE and they didn't apply the patch. That's
I mean, I would say it's a misconfiguration of the auto update feature.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep. So to quote a little bit of the article here, Viasat says the attackers took down customers' residential modems by breaching the management network and issuing management commands to overwrite the device's flash memory, rendering them unable to reconnect to the network, but not bricking them all together. Subsequent investigation, forensic analysis identified a ground-based network intrusion by an attacker exploiting a misconfiguration in a VPN appliance to gain remote access to the trusted management segment of the satellite network. And then use this network access to execute legitimate targeted management commands on a large number of residential modems simultaneously. Oops.
Yeah, I am curious. Why do that and burn that against consumers? Is that a test? Is that to validate the first part of internal network begins to allow other things to happen?
I'd argue that probably this wasn't all consumer, that they were intended to maybe catch some of the backups for some of the government, and why not cut everything off to prove that we can?
Yeah, I usually see a ramp up. I'm curious to see where this one plays out. I mean, with Chrome 0 day, a Spring for Shell O-Day, and proof of concept release very quickly, and then this in conjunction with a lot of the denial of service stuff happening, and wiper ransomware from both sides getting deployed against consumers on both sides. this just is escalating in the cyber side of this. Like, hopefully the kinetic side of this, like people's lives are starting to become less impacted, and this isn't a ramp up to something else. But not that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, one could also say this is a normal week in the hacker land and cybersecurity.
Yeah, until you're using it for a war. Like,
yes.
I think that's one of the differences. Once we start to see a lot of what we're used to, as far as, hey, there's a breach, there's a 0 day, there's all of these security concerns and vulnerabilities. Okay, that's bad. We need a patch. But when we're actively at war and there's multiple countries involved that is currently escalating, that has nuclear capabilities across several of these, that's when it gets really interesting. We have to actually pay attention to what each of these mean, how they play together, and look where there is not smoke. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors happening, but where's the trail leading away from all the smoke, and what is not happening in the mirrors? That's the pieces that we kind of have to pay attention to and use some deductive reasoning and understand the political landscape, because it may become important for many of the enterprises out there.
Yeah. Well, I think not tied to this are bugs that were fixed as part of a bug bounty program. Probably not tied to all of this, right? We look at the Sophos remote code execution. Lee, you had this story in there. I think we had the exact same story, linked to the same story. RCE and in the web interface, was that the deal?
The critical life last one? Yeah.
Yeah, Sophos, firewall,
yeah.
RCE, yeah.
And I was looking at that one earlier this week. One of the things I thought was interesting is they put out some updates for no longer supported firmware versions, and I'm thinking that's very nice of them. They could have just said, too bad, so sad. Although they said for versions that are not here, freaking update. Freaking might have been my term. It floors me to think that you wouldn't keep your firewall current and with current firmware on it. It's supported. It's kind of important.
Yeah, people they fire and forget with those firewall appliances. Certainly,
I know they do.
Flies under the radar, and then
we also have to remember a lot of the rest of the world is not as technologically up to date and doesn't have access to all of the same supply lines, supply chains, manufacturers, and companies that distribute some of these firewalls. And so, what is being leveraged for backbones and a lot of the internet outside of the United States, it is not the newest or the greatest or the latest always. Those are things that our Western mind is a creature comfort of, thinking that everything a company has a lot of money is the latest, greatest, and best that they can get. Sometimes there's export laws. Sometimes they don't have to get those.
Yep. Microsoft updates in China, for example, go to China-based update servers. They will not actually go directly to Microsoft. So
that's scary.
Yep.
Let's see. A new Army unit will combine military intelligence with open source data on foreign adversaries. My whole reaction, even just reading the headline, was, wait, we're not doing this already? Like, hold on.
Hold up a minute.
Military intelligence an oxymoron?
Yes.
Yes. Especially in this case when, like, my wife is like, oh, that person? Yeah. I stalked them on Facebook and tells me all about it. I'm like, I'm so proud of you, Tweety. And now here we have the U.S. military that's like, oh, yeah, we're creating this whole group that, like, can look people up on Facebook and look up companies on the internet and gain intelligence. I'm like, what?
The question is what is Quadling's child contributing to their threat intel?
Right.
Not entirely yet, but I'm certain that she will be at some point. At 3.5, we've already noticed that the manipulation has begun. I'm terrified to say that my child knows how to push more buttons on more people than elevators have.
Yes.
Terrifying.
Raising the kid.
I learned it by watching you. Where'd you learn how to do this? I learned it by watching you.
So I've been thinking about what you guys said about the military intelligence and open source intelligence, and I think that there's a couple of things. I think much of the military, and I may be way the hell off here, but some of them have standing orders. They're only allowed to use intelligence from sort of specified sources. And secondly, my guess is that anybody that has a knack for open source intelligence in the military got yanked by the various DISA, NSA, whatever, really quickly.
Yep.
I think one of the challenges there is that you have to trust the source of your intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like so open source intelligence implies that you've got to take her with a grain of salt wherever this thing is coming from to begin with, right? Mm-hmm. And so can that be used to mislead people? It's the same way that people that would put block lists for IP addresses in their firewall. It's like, oh great, I'm going to give you a list of IP addresses so you block the thing that's actually important to you.
Right.
And I'm going to make you shoot yourself in the foot. Mm-hmm. Similar kind of thing you can do with the intelligence sources.
Mm.
And additionally, you've got to realize that oftentimes, depending on how critical or what you're working with, if you're working in the military, the sources of those intelligence, if it's already open, become time sensitive and may not be as useful as other access that you have. That being said, sometimes the open source community ends up doing a better, faster job just because of the crowdsourcing ability that they have, if it's available out there. So the access to certain info that is relevant and how timely that information gets parsed and digested makes a difference.
Yeah. I wanted to
and
go ahead, Lee.
And I've got another comment here. Go ahead, Lee.
But what I was saying is they had that comment that Army Cyber Command was the only service component without military intelligence brigade for intelligence support. In other words, they're having to build that bridge themselves, and I think that's where this sounds like I finally took that hill. I've been fighting this damn battle, and I'm going to make a big deal. I freaking got this in place. Kind of announced me. They had to build their own. They couldn't use anybody else, and somebody funded them.
Right.
Yep. I wanted to follow up with on the comment about the ones that Mark commented about. Like, you got to trust your sources. There's apparently some late breaking news that both Apple and Facebook provided user data in response to forged legal requests sent by hackers using compromised law enforcement email systems. Like, oof. Like, some of the stuff normally would require a warrant, but because of the emergency requests coming through from these particular sources, they didn't require a warrant. And
let's be clear. If anybody's thinking that law enforcement IT is good, there are some that are. Most of them aren't.
Yeah. It reminds me when I worked at the university and pirating content was a huge problem, and sharing of that pirated content.
No, that never happened.
Oh my God, it was huge. I mean, especially we're talking early 2000s, it was rampant. So much so that IT departments, right? IT departments at universities were all of a sudden inundated with this flood of requests of DMCA takedown notices, because the content owners, RIAA, MPAA, hired teams of people to go find this content and issue these notices. Like, they got their act together. All of a sudden we were inundated with this, and a lot of people at the university were like, we need to build a process around this, and we need to take these users down, and users were paying fines and all this stuff. Like students would literally have to pay fines from the RIAA. And I was one of the few that stood up and said, we should validate these requests, because this could totally, what is stopping someone from sending in a fraudulent request to go either take down this IP address or machine, or, serve them with a fine? Like, how do you know that's real? How do you know that's not fraud? I mean, we need to do some level of validation. And when the request came in, when you look at the request, you're like, that looks kind of spammy, just getting the request. And some of them were legitimate, but there were a lot of people that had to pay fines for pirating content. I actually forgot about that. So yeah, you got to validate your sources. Do you want to talk about Lapsus?
I remember paying.
Right, it's pain. We're talking about Lapsus. Was Lapsus really one of the masterminds a teen in the UK? Is that, speaking of validating your sources? Yeah. Right. This was a real thing.
It's a 16-year-old Oxford student who's got something like, 10 million in Bitcoin that he's gathered so far, and just he's freaking amazing.
he's been tracked for a little while by a few of us, and he's done some things with sim swapping over for a while. But like, there's nothing super fancy about them. Like, they bought some creds off of Genesis and leveraged and checked if those creds worked, and then went to town. There's some interesting theories. I mean, channel's still active. There's still lots of people doing stuff in there. So even though there's 7 arrests around him, there's still a lot going on. On top of that, like, the level of heist that they pulled off, between Samsung, Microsoft, NVIDIA, all of the things that they're leaking with inside of that, like, it seems highly convenient to have a group very eager to take credit and to do things. Maybe they did do those things, but the way that they did them, I'm still speculating that maybe a threat actor needed access to those and wanted to have some smoke and mirrors to play with, left some easy access things, dropped a hint, maybe it was in the group, and then they went after those things and got in because it was easily left vulnerable or easy access, and thus took credit, dumped a bunch of stuff. But I don't know. We're still not 100% sure on everything that went on, but we have so much information on the group and what's going on and all the players. We've had that information, so there's not a lot of conjecture with inside the places that need to know.
The highly distributed nature of these attacks, is that different from 20 plus years ago? I feel like there was collaboration 20 plus years ago, but it was a much smaller circle of people where you were responsible as the attacker for more phases of the attack. And as we've pushed forward with technology and the internet and being hyper connected, it has allowed criminals to have this very distributed, like, the criminal activity that you're performing is a small piece. It's an important piece. And I don't know if I talked about this last week, right? But there's then the teenagers that are making all this money in Bitcoin is an interesting point, because there was a teenager that talked about these teenage rings of people who, when you do SIM swapping, for example, that's coupled with stolen credentials to gain access to someone's crypto wallet, there's like 3 or 4 different groups collaborating to pull off this attack. I feel like back in time, like, you were like one person and doing all these stages. Now you got the one person that steals the manager tablet from the telecommunications provider. They can do the SIM swap and has a window of maybe 10 minutes before T-Mobile realizes that manager tablet has been missing. Then you've got the person,
or his bro's working there and he knows a guy that knows a guy to do it.
Exactly. And then you've got the holder, because you don't want to be the person holding the phone that you're SIM swapping to. So you've got the person who's got the bank of phones that's going to be the holder and read you the codes. And then you've got you as the attacker. And really all you're holding is the credentials for that person, the target's email and the target's crypto wallet or Coinbase account or whatever it happens to be. And you're relying on all these different other teenagers to like
a highly reliable
Jack
bunch.
Schreier like broke down in laughter when he was like, this attack was being described to him, because he's like what if like they're like, little Jimmy, it's time for dinner, when you're in the middle of this very time sensitive attack. But these people are making hundreds of thousands of dollars in 10 minutes just doing the SIM swap, doing the holding, all I did was, I mean, you don't have to be that sophisticated of an attacker to swipe someone's creds. You can go into a data breach and get someone's creds. You can
credential stuffing.
And credential stuffing.
Yeah.
And that's not hard.
And that is kind of the point with this group and why it's so convenient, right? Like, hey, there's some creds over on Genesis. You should check these out and see if you can get in. Well, who put those creds there? How'd they get there? And then these guys aren't even doing their own infrastructure, building their own rats, working with Trojans. Like, this is all push button. You get an obfuscated wiper kit or malware or Trojan and just leverage one of the pay as you go or pay services, and you've got a full stack. So you don't have infrastructure, you don't really have to fish. You go get creds from for $5 to $15 on Genesis, and then you move on, you gain access, you test it, and your buddy does SIM swap. Maybe you pay for a SIM swap app, and you're in, done.
But I feel like that's harder for law enforcement to go after, because you're tracking all of these different groups and different individuals that are a very small piece. And like, you could go after someone with a small piece, but it's not a big heist, not a big win for law enforcement for that one small piece.
Yeah, and I think the law enforcement threshold for a lot of these attacks is like really, really high bar. Like, I've been involved in a number of the payday cases where somebody actually managed to get the director of payroll to change somebody's direct deposit to a completely different account. And unless you cross a certain barrier, the FBI is like, meh.
Yeah.
They don't care. And it's not that, well, I shouldn't say they don't care. They don't have the resources to deal with such a small quantity. They need a bigger payout to begin with. But I thought, at least from my understanding of Lapsus, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that this group, part of it was, as I was reading it, they actually did a lot of really cool like social engineering. It wasn't about the hacking, like the bang, 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 bang on the keyboard, I'm in. It was more about the getting information about the people through social engineering aspect. Like supposedly the person that they got access to with the contractor that worked with Okta, for example. That's my understanding, at least. Like, it wasn't so much they just found cred dumps or something. They specifically convinced that person to give them access, to give them, hey, we'll give you more money than you're currently being paid to give us access to your shit.
Well, that's an interesting economics aspect. Once you start amassing this money, now you can go bribe people. And that's, in a lot of ways, much cleaner than, pizza bombing them into submission, right? Which really just pisses me off too when they do that stuff, especially for high value social media accounts, and they're just pizza bombing the person until they give up their creds. Like, that's in law enforcement can't really help with that scenario, which is just disgusting, right? They might get involved if you SWAT the person, right? Because that's what it escalates to. I'll pizza bomb you, then I'm going to SWAT you, and that really pisses off law enforcement. But the pizza bombing, you piss off the pizza delivery people, okay, right? But you piss off the local SWAT team, maybe they start paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, once they do get creds, these kids aren't scared to do some of the social engineering, which is a little bit different from some of the other actors. It was surprising how little voice social engineering happened at the level that needed to in many of the companies from some of the older groups. But yeah, calling the help desk, verifying creds, looking at the VPN, getting MFA reset, all of those things are being done through social engineering if there's not a SIM swap happening or if they're trying to do it a different way. So yeah, you're spot on right there.
And that comes back to a challenge of the Security Operations Center is how do they detect that kind of activity?
Right.
Where are the help desk people somehow marking that, hey, I got a call from so-and-so claiming such and such, and
yeah, all time. I was just thinking of the other, similar to pizza bombing, there's a package bombing attack where USPS will ship you free packaging for priority mail packages.
Yeah.
And they'll send them
FedEx and some others will do that as well. They'll happily give you stuff to send their stuff with their stuff.
So they'll dock someone and then be like, oh, now I have their address. I can just send them thousands and thousands of boxes.
And then you can build furniture from it. But college students get arrested for that.
Well, these are high school students that don't want their parents to find out. So it's highly effective in extortion for these. Oh my God. This is just not sitting well with me that there are people out there doing this and not suffering any consequences for the most part. Up until a certain point, right? And what is that threshold? That's what grinds my gears. Tyler, you mentioned the spring. Spring is the time for spring exploits. And I thought that I want to call it out. Whoever wrote this article for Naked Security, Paul Ducklin, great job. Great, I recognize that name.
Paul, yeah.
Well, not Paul. Well, yes, that name, the first name, yes, it's a good first name. But did a great job. If you don't know what Spring is, like, and I haven't known Java development in a while,
and that was my first question. What is this Spring? Like, I thought that's what Homer flushed down the toilets.
Yeah, I kind of thought of it as like a microservice-ish thing for Java. Was my very rudimentary and not very accurate.
All of those words together sound horrible.
It sounds horrible, but the way Paul describes it is really awesome. I'm like, dude, you did a great job describing that, and then went on to describe the actual attack.
So what is Spring?
Paul's explanation is the best one. It's basically a serverless computing environment for Java, so that the developer can just write the functional code, and Spring takes care of all the servers, all the networking, TLS, all the other things that you don't want developers to care about.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong?
It's like Docker for Java.
Yes, it kind of is. Except like one thing he says is the parsing of HTTP requests.
Your first mistake was saying Java.
Right. It's the parsing of HTTP requests that speaks to the crux of this attack.
Oh, God.
Because you write some Java code, you put it in the Spring environment, and then the person calling your Java function via the web to look up a username in a database, for example, inserts a specific HTTP header into the web request. If that header contains Spring code structure in the right way, that header gets executed on the server. Right? Developer writes really clean code, but inside the header that you didn't want the developer to worry about, right? Inside that header, that's where your exploit is, and it's an RCE for like whatever server the Spring framework and system is running on. So, there's exploits for Windows systems, for Linux systems, basically dump out a shell.
Didn't we sort of just do this with the Log4j thing?
It's
kind of similar.
There wasn't
the flashback seizures. I'm not sure which.
Wasn't there another vulnerability that was doing a header exploit not that long ago that we talked about, Larry?
Mm-hmm.
It's sounding really familiar.
Yeah, it might have been Log4j. We also talked about a Java thing at AWS, I think. Maybe it wasn't Java.
Yeah, because it's just totally ringing a bell.
It is.
I mean, it's somewhat related to request smuggling as well.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of similar. Yeah. So you got to patch your Spring environment.
Because a lot of the stuff you guys have that's been patched, this now is able to circumvent, and so all of the target lists and all the things that were already enumerated and many of the request queries can be reused and modified a little bit to see if it's going to be vulnerable. So, yeah, the timing is very interesting and not great.
Mm. So you're saying, like, from Log4j, you can reuse some of those techniques and payloads for Spring?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, you know where a lot of Java's running, and you know where there's input.
Yep.
Strings, so.
Right. Yeah, so that's bad. Get patching on that. What else? There was Defender for IoT. I thought it was something more related to the Java Spring one. Not the address book disclosure, racing as a clock. Maybe.
I mean, Finn Fisher is finally going insolvent.
I thought that was interesting. Like, the German government was really hot to trot and breathing down the neck of Finn Fisher for quite some time. I mean, this is like a new thing. It's kind of, when I read the article, it kind of had a lot of parallels to that NSO group, right? Except I don't think Finn Fisher was affiliated in any way with the government, and we can only speculate how tied NSO, is to the Israeli government, right? We don't really have. We can do some heavy speculating there. Probably wouldn't be that far off base, right? That's neither here nor there. But with Finn Fisher, I mean, this was somewhat of an independent group. They were being taken down, still trying to be taken down by the German government. And then, like, it's seemingly out of the blue. And again, I'm not really close to this story or some of the details. They're just like, yeah, we're closing up shop. And I thought that was kind of weird. That, and it kind of like almost like ransomware groups will be like, yeah, we're shutting it down. That's it. We're done. But they're really not. Like, they're just burning their infrastructure to create new infrastructure. And I'm like, is FinFisher doing the same thing? Oh, they're like, oh, we're dissolving. We don't exist anymore. But like, someone has a copy of that code. That code just didn't get obliterated off the face of the planet. People still have that code. So were they just spinning up as something different to avoid prosecution? I think law enforcement probably got really close. They could feel them breathing down their necks. And they were like, you know what? Like enemy of the state style, like blow it all up, but take those copies with me as I leave the burning building, and we'll just go spin up somewhere else. That's my.
I'm sure
I have absolutely no evidence to support that. That's the beauty of it.
It's a private company that was funded by a lot of wealthy people. A lot of governments probably supported some of the use of that. So like the idea of them taking a lot of money and then burning it down and doing something different or starting something new or rebranding, all of those are very high possibilities. It's just like any other corporation. So I think it's highly likely. It is interesting. We've seen very little use of I'll say mobile malware that has been discovered, at least during this war. There's been, some messing and mucking with stingrays and downgrade attacks and SS7 networks and things like that, but there's not as much on the mobile devices that we've heard of. So is that relevant to something, or is it not?
I love how you always have your tinfoil hat on. It's one of the things I love about you, Tyler.
It's imbued into the faux hawk at this point.
It's integrate. It's like you can put solar panels on your house, or you can get the ones that look like your roofing tiles but are solar panels. That's Tyler's tinfoil hat. It's built right into the fabulous hairdo that he has.
It's like that Guardian of the Galaxy.
Shall we talk about attacking Tyler's UPS?
Oh, probably not Tyler's UPS because of the tinfoil hat and all.
Well,
I don't know. Most of
the one he wants us to think is his UPS.
Most of the consumer UPSs don't get networked, right? Even if they have network, I don't think most people. I mean, when you're attacking the network stack on a UPS, you're going after something in a data center, right? You're not
exactly.
Yes, and that's why they're targeting it, right?
Mm-hmm. We've seen several weeks ago. We talked about UPSs in some of the testing that was happening, right? Where they were able to set those UPSs on fire. And like when you start to talk about large data centers, you think about crypto mining, high frequency trading, governments with supercomputers, like the level of power that is being consumed and you have to have for backup generation, and the batteries and UPSs that they're using for those, multi-million-dollar investments. They have a ton of stacks so that they can do that live mirror failover. You're not dropping packets. You don't have infrastructure that is getting burnt up or ruined that's millions of dollars. So these are very sophisticated machines that do require that network access. It's not just for checking to see if you have power or you don't have power. Like these are doing some things that require high fidelity networks and integration. Now those should be well protected and segmented, and we should consider that.
Yeah, but also, I mean, the attacks against these UPSs are highly sophisticated in that they use default usernames and passwords to access these devices. What?
You mean the default one?
Because those are those are always changed. Yes.
But I mean, that goes back to what we have in our head as far as how operations handle things or how procurement and deployment of large projects happen. We're talking about power. These are often, qualified electricians. They have to be licensed and certified. You've got a construction company that buys this as part of the larger contract and puts it in, does everything, and does the connection as part of the integrator. And so none of these people are security related. None of these people are even basically general IT related. And they're the ones that are deploying it, and often the ones that manage it from the OT or building automation side. So we really can't be too surprised. We just have to figure out how to integrate better with those teams as part of those projects and deployments. That's a huge part of some of the larger ones I've done is, cybersecurity is never integrated, never thought about. No one from, the construction company, management company, all the way down to procurement, no one thinks about it.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to a segmentation problem. Those are power people, not IT people. They're thinking, I need to provide juice to these things. They're not thinking about that somebody needs to query the juice from someplace else. Like,
right. Or it's in a playbook. After I install this thing and wire all the power, I go to a browser, I enter this IP address, and I put in admin and username admin to log in, and I change these 3 settings and set the voltage, whatever, and then click save, and I'm done.
Right. I enable SNMP version 1, and yeah, sure, what could go wrong? I think that's an interesting thing. Like, as a homeowner, I actually have the Tesla Powerwall 2s. And
is that what you just got too, Larry?
Say that again?
Tesla Powerwall?
I did get 2 of them.
Yep. So I got 2 of those at home, plus a solar array, and I ended up with an expert electrician solving a problem with my UPSs, where it turns out that there's some convoluted things about the way that battery backups and solar energy and mainline power all sort of try to talk to each other, which is that I had one afternoon, sunny afternoon, solar arrays going full tilt, power walls are fully charged, and mainline power dropped. All of my UPSs started beeping. I'm on battery backup. I'm like, wait, how is this possible? Why are you on battery backup? The power walls are fully charged.
Is that the way it's supposed to? Is that an option? So that was my question, just like security aside, power related. Your solar, is that also a fail safe where I cut over to solar? Is that like an option when you buy it?
It can be.
Yeah, okay.
It can be. So the bizarre thing turned out to be that the APC UPSs have a threshold of they only like power up to, power cycles in US at 60 hertz.
Yep.
And they only like up to 63 hertz. Teslas are sitting there fully charged. The solar array is going gangbusters. The mainline power is dropped, so the array can't put the power load back onto mains.
It's got to put it somewhere.
It's got to put it somewhere. So the Teslas have to tell the array, I don't know who you are, but you need to stop giving me power because I don't have room for you. So the Teslas cycle the hertz cycle up to 65 hertz. So, of course, the solar inverter turns off, says, okay, I'm done. I don't know what's going on, but I'm not going to make any more juice. Battery backups kick in. Everything else in the house is happy, but it turned out that the APCs, because they were triggered at 63, were like, we don't like what's going on. We're going to stay on battery because we don't like the power signals we're getting.
It's not like the guy in Spider-Man who's like, I really, the power's different here, and I really like it.
Yeah, this was kind of the opposite, and it was like this bizarre thing, and it took this very qualified electrician that I am happy to throw lots of money at to figure out that you need to get these guys to figure out how to set this, and they did. Tesla and the solar company reconfigured everything so that their trip line was 62.9 hertz.
Nice.
Wow.
So that the APCs would be happy.
That's awesome.
Bizarre thing. But yeah,
that's why it's expensive to do like good solar, right? And you have those hybrid inverters with the full package systems because you have to get all that impedance right. You've got your phasing. Synchronous phasing has to go on and off, back to the grid and back to battery, and those are usually at different hertz. Not to mention your ability to drain quickly, phase that over, and not damage anything because you've got push and pull happening with the asynchronous wavelengths. And if you push something back to the grid and you get that wrong, like it's going to be a bad day for everybody. So this is why it just doesn't work real easily to do.
Now, what is? I just wanted to add really quick that one of the other things, of course, as a security professional, the first thing I did is I scanned the crap out of both the inverter and Tesla. And they actually both of them. It's a Solar Edge inverter and a Tesla Powerwall, and they actually both only do outbound communications. They do not allow any. They don't want anything inbound. They don't talk anything inbound. They don't do SSH. They just occasionally it's just a quick HTTPS. Here's my data. done.
I think I may
Did-
have
And that's
Did you
all,
nearly.
kind of all they do.
I think I may have nearly the exact same system that you do.
Did you sniff the broadcast traffic and what was going out across that from the VPN going outbound?
There's, in my system at least, from what I could tell, using Security Onion, TCP dump, and a variety of other things, I did not find any kind of like IPsec outbound, any kind of other like sustained crypto tunnel outbound. These were just burst, periodic sort of outbound data packets, and then that's all they kind of were. Like, I was really impressed that they did a pretty good job. All things, I can't say it's perfect, but from the limited testing I did, it was pretty cool.
Yep, I got the same inverters as SolarEdge converters.
Sounds like you need to get a firmware change, Larry.
Yeah, exactly. I'll be talking to them when they come back out to get it all certified, because we're still quote not in the approved. We're not approved through the electrical inspector and our provider and all that stuff to do grid tie, and they haven't replaced the meter yet. That spins in both directions, as it were.
Yes, you'll be very thankful when the power bills start
Yes.
sort of balancing out, though, because I have like March through October where there's no utility bill whatsoever.
Nice. On the converse, our installers, when they were there, came to me with a problem, and they said, "Hey, we see that there's a lot of electronic equipment in the basement, and there's like lots of parts. Tesla forgot to send us this little thing that has a resistor in it that does the network terminator for the two power walls to communicate. And we can call Tesla, but it's going to be like 3 weeks for them to send us this little baggie of extra kits. Do you happen to have one of these connectors available?" And he handed me one, and I said, "I only need these two, so if I could plug this into here and this into here, I can do that." I'm like, "Let me look."
They were in the right house.
So I looked, and I didn't have the right connector, but I had one that was really close. So I go and cut the resistor out of this thing that he's got, and I attach it to these two other things. And I said, "If you plug this into here and that into there, I bet it'll work." And he's like, "Hold on. Yup, it works. Looks good." And he said, "What did you do?" I said, "Here, have this whole stack of parts that I just used," because this was super simple. It was a bunch of DuPont wires, like the little jumper wires with the female ends on them. And I'm like, "Yeah, I just cut these off and attached them to your, to your resistor." And in fact, you probably didn't even cut this up, because I probably had about a dozen or more resistors in the shop. So
It's awesome.
super simple, non-technical fix.
I think installers are not prepared for the likes of us.
No.
Like both of my installers were also like, "We need to have internet access. Where's your cable modem?" I'm like, "No, you plug into port 38 of this Cisco switch.
Right.
You plug into port 39 of this Cisco switch,
And I'll enable those ports.
I will deal with the rest.
Yeah.
Just trust me. You will have internet access. I will take care of the rest
on your own VLAN.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
They wasted the whole day on that conversation. I was out of town, and they sat there and they're like, "No, we got to have this set up. We can't sign off. No one will let this happen." And they ended up doing a power over or Ethernet over power line to try and make it work and plug into my switch, because they thought that they had some cabling issues, and no, it just was not port enabled.
Nope.
Ubiquiti is suing Brian Krebs.
Speaking of Wi-Fi.
Speaking of Wi-Fi.
What the hell?
I from everything I can tell, I mean, even when I saw this, like, I was siding with Brian Krebs, because he's, I mean, talk about journalistic integrity. I mean, he's got a track record. He's been on the show before. We read his articles all the time. Ubiquiti saying that he did not disclose information intentionally, and disregarded the steps the company took to target Ubiquiti in an effort to increase ad revenue, but to drive traffic to his website. And I'm like,
yeah. So they basically saying he defamed him for profit,
right?
And that he, from my understanding, was that Krebs wrote an article and said, "Hey, Ubiquiti got compromised, and they did a shitty thing by not telling anybody." and now Ubiquity's suing him for saying, but we did all these things that you didn't mention, when in fact the root of the problem is that they didn't do what they did exactly what he said.
Before we get into the analysis of more legal experts,
sure,
I just want to play this scenario out for Brian Krebs. Like, he gets a lot of traffic, right? And so you think about if he's going to risk everything to fudge something in an article to get how much more traffic? Like, how much more traffic are we talking about? Like, is he really going to risk everything as a journalist,
right,
to gain how much traffic to make that much more ad revenue? Brian's a smart guy, man. Like, even if he was nefarious like this, which he's not, by the way, like, the juice isn't worth the squeeze for Brian Krebs.
Yeah,
he's a smart guy.
This is the one information security journalist targeted by the Meraki botnet,
right,
just to take down his site because he's so popular, and he had the journalistic integrity to leave the Washington Post to start doing his own thing.
Right.
And to say that he's going to somehow all of a sudden change course for advertising revenue and somehow more clickbait, what? No, I don't.
No,
way out of the realm of possibility.
But he's had other companies who were not satisfied with the gist of his reporting, who have also in the past turned on him as well. Like, they were unhappy with you painted us in an unfavorable light. Oh my God! Like, how dare you do that? It's like,
well, you painted yourself
because you screwed yourself over by doing the bad thing in the first place, or lacking the oversight to do the right thing in the first, whatever it was. But you know what I mean? Like, it. Yeah, I'm not buying it.
I'm not buying it either. And then what is also evidence?
Lee's got some comments in here.
Oh, go ahead, Lee. I think you're sidelining, Lee. You're sidelining again.
I am sidelining. Come back to me.
Hold on. Let me talk about the second part while you're fixing that issue, Lee, and then I'll go back to you. Corey Quinn is the chief cloud economist at the Duckbill Group. He called into question Ubiquity's lawsuit and pointed out, and I quote from, I believe this is the SE Magazine, who's another CRA property, right? They report that he pointed out that the law firm representing Ubiquity has a long history of suing media companies. That's even just like the highlight. I linked to the whole Twitter thread where Corey Quinn, it broke down everything in the public legal documents and basically called into question, from what to me would look like a legal perspective, like just basically calling BS on the whole thing. So while we as cybersecurity professionals, we're siding with Brian for all the reasons we just mentioned. If you want to step outside that, you can look at Corey's analysis and have even more evidence to go. Like, they're just, they're just upset with Brian and they're suing him because this is, America, and anyone can sue anyone for everything.
Yeah, and by the way, we lost a ton of money last year because this bad thing happened, and it's all Brian's fault.
Yeah. No. Which is a shame, because we like Ubiquity gear.
Yeah.
Most of us use Ubiquity gear.
Yep.
Even despite the fact that they got breached.
Yeah.
And we always go back to, like, look, you got breached. It's like well, it's not okay. Like, we get it. Companies get breached. People get breached. Right. It happens. Be transparent about it. Say what you know and say what you don't know. Totally fine with us. We'll respect you. It's when you hide stuff that we're like, no, like, hiding stuff is bad. Like, what else now the question becomes, like, what else you hiding? That's
hiding or deflecting.
Yes.
My point hopefully this is better.
Yes.
My point, I was looking at this going, okay, Krebs posted this article that they're all upset about in December of 2021 about a Ubiquity disclosure in January of 2021 of a breach that happened in December of 2020. I'm kind of like, it's a year later, and they've already disclosed it, and they're losing their stuff over that. I mean, come on, guys. You've already done damage and damage control.
Yeah, and his thing was like, dude, you took a year to disclose that you were breached.
And it was from an insider threat that they prosecuted the person, which is further like okay, like we talk about negligence, but it was an insider threat. Like, okay, that can happen. I mean, like maybe one thing you need to treat your employees better, but like you can just come out and say that, like, oh, I made a mistake. We should probably treat our employees better because we have this insider threat, or this was an extraneous circumstance, or whatever it is. Like, be a little more transparent.
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of lessons learned and examples we could all follow about, frickin' come clean.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes.
Right. Well, that's the one thing. I don't want to get into not so much politics, but like, cancel culture and all that stuff. But like, I still want to be beholden to this notion that like we're humans and we all make mistakes. And if we make a mistake, we can recognize that, we can learn from it, and we can get better. I think as a society, we can't lose sight of that. I think as that applies to cybersecurity is really along the lines of what we're saying. Companies get breached and it happens. And I like to think that in most cases, companies learn from the cybersecurity mistakes and get better. Because like, I also don't think you should stop using a particular software or hardware, once they get breached. Like if we did that, we would have a very limited set of options that we could use for hardware and software. And I also think that a company that has been breached likely learned from that, which means probably pretty secure moving forward. I mean, unless you're Microsoft Azure Defender for IoT, but that's a different story.
Did I just hear a segue?
Yes. It breaks my heart because we were actually really lucky to interview folks from Microsoft that were the pioneers and engineers behind the first versions of Azure for IoT, which they called it something to Azure Sphere.
Azure Sphere, yep.
Is what they called it.
What story
Before
is this,
they
Paul?
did the very Microsoft thing. This is my story number 17.
Great.
They did the very Microsoft thing of renaming things because Microsoft loves to rename things. I don't know what they're like.
It's not Windows Defender. It's Microsoft
Microsoft.
Defender.
They're like, really? Like, anyway. So they renamed it. But like, I had high hopes. Like, they had addressed, like, they set out to understand the security issues, the fundamental security issues that are with embedded systems and IoT systems. Larry had been the courseware, one of the primary courseware author for SAN's new IoT. What do you call the course?
Sec 566, pen testing IoT.
Yeah. And so as well as I do, because Larry and I mean, we talked about these fundamental things in 2006 when we started writing the book for Linksys WRT54G routers. We were like, there's some just fundamental things that are broken and wrong with firmware and IoT devices. We didn't call them IoT devices back then.
They were embedded devices.
Systems. Yeah, embedded devices, embedded systems. And Microsoft took time to understand that, created a great list, and then developed a product based off of those findings, called it Azure Sphere. And I'm like, they get it. But it's had so many security issues since then. I'm like,
you have to understand that Microsoft is when you're dealing with Microsoft, you're dealing with Microsoft and Microsoft and Microsoft and Microsoft and Microsoft.
Oh, and Microsoft.
And Microsoft, yeah.
There's 118,000 employees at Microsoft.
I've had several different incident response cases. So no way, shape, or form affiliated with my company at this point. The opinion I'm about to express.
Right. The opinion expressed
of Mark. And then
this is me as a practitioner for years. I've had several incident response cases where there are people there that are brilliant, who really know their shit when it comes to incident response, forensics, threat hunting, etc.
Probably have worked there for a really long time.
And they're really good at what they do. But then there's the same other people on their same team who are their antithesis. And I've had a case where I was working where we had a client and the one person was with me we were sharing information about like, hey, did you see this in the MFT? Did you find that? Did you determine that this RPC came from that person? and so on. And we were totally in sync, and it was brilliant, and it was a great collaboration. And there's this other guy, it's like, what are you doing with that laptop? Oh, I ran this Microsoft Wolf triage tool on it, and I'm just poking around looking for stuff, and I'm like, that's patient 0.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do a forensic disk image? Huh? What? And you didn't even do a forensic disk image to preserve anything about this system. You're poking around, launching programs, doing stuff, like, and you don't even, you put this thing on the network and you don't even know what the hell it's doing or how it's compromised.
You're at the crime scene with no gloves on.
And and the person from like the prosecution, the people who are going to follow this in a legal perspective are standing behind me, like going like, huh? Like, what the hell are you doing? And it's like, how can I have like one person who's on one end of the spectrum and another person who's on the other end of the spectrum?
Because it's, I mean, dude, it's corporate America on steroids. I mean, I think all of us on the show and most of us listening, right, we worked in corporate America, and as the size of the company increases, the diversity in the people in their skill sets and work ethic and all that stuff diversifies as well. Which is interesting when you think about it. You're working for a company that has 5,000, 50,000 people, right? Microsoft, as we talked about last week, has 118,000 employees.
That's it?
Yeah.
That's probably more than that.
No, I think it was 127,000.
Wow.
What? We're going to have to look it up again.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It was a lot. It was over 100,000 people.
Yep. The other one I want to bring up here that is incredibly disappointing at this is Azure Defender for IoT. This is the group that purchased Binwalk from Refirm. This is the group
They purchased Refirm Labs.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Craig Hefner and Terry McCorkle? Terry McCorkle, Craig Hefner.
Craig Hefner.
Yeah, Refirm Labs. They did get acquired by Microsoft
about a year and a half ago.
And they are the creators and maintainers of Binwalk.
Yep, which is incredibly disappointing because we talk about this. We talk about Binwalk quite a bit in the Sec 556 class because it's amazing at what it does. It's the leader in what it does.
It's a great tool. Absolutely.
I've used it. It's part. We were talking before the show. There is part of my research projects I'm working on now. With firmware, I built a container that builds the latest version of Binwalk. I stole the extractor script from Firmadyne, and I built that into the container. And the extractor script will actually run Binwalk and then do some extra extraction type stuff based off the Binwalk results. And what I found is, over the years, Binwalk has gotten a lot better. It's a lot more accurate at extracting those parts from the firmware.
Prior to acquisition, Binwalk open source had this feature set, and they subscribed to the Metasploit model, in that there's a commercial version, which has the better stuff.
That on their GitHub, yes.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they got acquired, they shut down the, quote, subscription model, which was super cheap. It was like $10 a month.
Oh, did they have a subscription model
that had advanced features? So like I had this firmware that I couldn't interact with the open source version of Binwalk, and I wanted to run it through the commercial version. So I go to sign up, and I'm like, we've been acquired. The service is no longer available. And if you were a customer before, you have access to this other commercial service that we're transitioning your account for, but you can't sign up for that transitional account or the other service.
Can you buy it today?
No,
you can't buy the.
You can't buy fuck all. It's open source or GTFO. And I'm like, where is Microsoft going with this? Because shut up and take my money. I want access to this other stuff because I've got this firmware I want to analyze that isn't supported under the open source version. And this is not boding well for shut up and take my money.
No.
Take another drink, Larry.
Guess those magic numbers, Larry.
At least it's good bourbon.
Guess the magic bytes of your offsets of what's in that firmware. I'll talk to you in a couple of months once you figure it out.
No, that assessment has ended. So
when you get highly customized firmware, it gets super, because there's a lot of collisions with those magic bytes.
Yep.
Because you're basically globs of data.
Yep.
But you're also globs of data that could be compressed, and like your previous blob is responsible for uncompressing, and like reverse engineering that shit is hard.
Or you're potentially even ending down the route of a real-time operating system.
Yes.
Like and now you're left IDA Pro or Ghidra to start analyzing that stuff.
Your real-time operating system doesn't necessarily have like a kernel and a file system, right? It's code running right on the chip.
Correct.
Yeah, that sucks even more.
Yep. And I think that's honestly, I think that's the realm that I was in. But I wanted to confirm, and that $10 to $15 a month thing that was super awesome wasn't available to me.
Yeah,
anymore.
if you got something specific, I mean, if you're just going after like random stuff, you can be like, oh, I'll just go on to this next firmware, this next device that fits more neatly into what I'm trying to do. But
something very specific.
If it's specific,
amazing.
I want to talk about the story I trolled Larry with. Your number 5, Larry. My number 2. The Honda Civic one.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, it's a good segue.
I thought you'd like that. I totally trolled him with it, but I knew he'd like it.
Yep. So, yeah. And this was really interesting, Lee, because Mr. Joshua Wright also brought this story to us about the same time in the 617 instructors Slack. And there was some discussion around it.
Company.
Yeah. So, effectively what this is that new-ish model Honda Civics between 2016 and 2020, the key fobs have been found to be subject to capture and replay-based attacks. So if you're in the presence of a key fob that are triggering the commands to lock, unlock, and remote start the Honda Civics, you can capture those and replay them at a later date to lock, unlock, and remote start those Honda Civics.
Can you
that's a lot
of,
of, but that's
can
a
you
lot
convince the car that the key fob's in the car, or does it care?
I don't know.
That's an interesting attack. Like, get a Raspberry Pi that emulates a key fob and stick it in the car.
I mean, honestly,
because like my car, like you could technically unlock my car with a key fob remote signal, but you have to be in the car with the key fob and repeatedly replay that signal.
Yep, and
whatever that is to say that, hey, I'm present.
I'm here.
Well, otherwise, the car's like, no, I'm not.
The car sense how the proximity of the key fob.
Right.
Yeah.
Most do. So.
And arguably, that's probably based on some rolling code technology, in that every time that the key fob sends data, it's a new code, just like we have in modern garage
which is
doors
probably a
and
predictable algorithm.
potentially, but predictable with lots of possible outputs and so forth. But this
isn't rolling, is it?
No rolling codes. You capture it, you can play it ad infinitum forever.
But there's a unique key pair between key fobs and cars?
No.
Otherwise, I'd be able to unlock other people's cars?
Yeah, maybe there is between car and key fob and car. But the point is that you capture it once, you've got that unique key pair. You don't even need to do any decoding. It's a stupid, simple attack. And this was also been a problem with some. And when Josh posted this, and when we were looking at that, and when Lee trolled me with it, I went and like, this is unoriginal this is unoriginal rice paddy all over again. Unoriginal rice paddy was an attack that was released about 18 months to 2 years ago for similar stuff for even more late model Honda vehicles.
But this can't be just Honda, because like
I was going to say, is my car still in a parking lot?
Yeah,
parked at Larry's house now.
So the fun one was that Josh's comment was, well, I feel a little bit better in that right now this attack requires a $350 HackRF to implement. And I said, well, if I go back and I look at some of the things that I did against my wife's Honda for capture and replay based attacks, all it required was a Raspberry Pi Zero, a piece of wire, and an RTL SDR. I mean, we're talking under $30.
But are you factoring in like Panda RF and some of the other like cool like RF specific hacks? Because I have one of those too, and it's a fun little gadget.
Oh, absolutely.
It helped me like automate an ancient garage door.
I mean, you could probably do that a heck of a lot cheaper than a Panda. The RTL SDR for receive and the Raspberry Pi using something like PiFM and one other one that's effectively toggling an I/O pin to do a transmit. It's not clean, it's not great, but on relatively short distances will work. And
so this sounds like some of the stuff that's in my hardware kit from a certain class I just took a few months ago.
I mean, you can attend a Security Weekly webcast and get $100 at Hacker Warehouse, and you don't have any money out of pocket.
Yeah, I mean, like looking at this particular attack, Josh's big thing was, it's $350. I'm like, you could probably do it for less than 30.
Yeah,
you just need to capture and replay, and there are tools out there already that do it. Because I did the exact same thing against my wife's Honda with $30 worth of tools. And I didn't think, and when I did it, I didn't think it worked. But it did. Oh. Because I replayed an unlock command for my wife's car, and she went out to go to the car, and she's like, I can't get into my car. The car's locked. And the keys are inside of it. Because it's in the garage. We leave, bad
so
security.
it actually did let her... Well, it let the car lock the doors with the key inside.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, because at least in her specific model of Honda, that if you unlock the door and you don't open it within a certain time frame, it relocks the doors.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So her keys were in the car. I had the spare valet key from the safe and was trying it out because I was too lazy. It was cold out, and I was too lazy to go to the car. And the safe is in the warm house, so do the unlock and lock it again, and then replay the unlock. And next thing
I just want to say that this sapling maple bourbon is amazing. I mean, it really is like drinking bourbon with maple syrup in it,
because that's exactly what it is.
It's delicious bourbon and delicious maple syrup. Like I'm contemplating pouring this on my pancakes.
Now, sapling actually makes a maple syrup.
They do. And they make a maple liqueur as well.
Oh, yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
Yep.
Delicious.
Yeah,
hey, Paul, how do you think that tastes in an old-fashioned?
I was just thinking the same thing.
It's a phenomenal old-fashioned. You don't even need to add simple syrup to it. Like, you just...
You could go lighter on the sugar.
Yep.
I'm thinking about smoking something to give it a smoky flavor to it.
That's an idea as well.
One of the hacks I saw, I forget which channel, there's like an Instagram channel where like the son and the dad have created this channel where he's like, Dad, can you make something with this? And Dad, can you sample all these like seltzers from Budweiser and tell me what you think? And he gives like the thumbs up or thumbs down. The dad's like an amazing like bartender and mixologist. And he did a thing where he made an old fashioned and he lit the cinnamon stick on fire with a torch and then put the glass over it and let the cinnamon stick smoke.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
And then made the drink and then put the burnt cinnamon stick right in. I'm like, so I like where this is going.
Not to go down a rabbit path too far, but my recipe for an old fashioned is, the little halos, the mandarin oranges, a couple of slices of mandarin orange muddled in the bottom of a glass with some maple syrup, peel, twist in the glass, Basil Hayden's bourbon, and then so maple syrup for the sweetener, and then over the top you do a little pour of Stroh's 150 spiced rum. Yeah, try that.
And then you smoke it in the cocktail smoker.
No, that's it.
I was doing my cocktail smoker.
And of course bitters, whether it be Peychaud's or Angostura, you take your pick.
I'm more fond of Peychaud's at this point. Like it's like a little bit more upscale. It adds, there's more quality to it in my view.
For the record, expect black walnut bitters coming up next year.
And there's a number of places in Vermont that are actually doing like custom bitters, vermouth, like they're like farm table type quality stuff.
That's what I love about. That's what I love about Vermont, farm to table.
A lot of farm to table stuff happening in Vermont. Yeah.
Arguably, I like state of Washington just as well because they have very similar vibes and farm to table and just without the snow.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about how security complexity is being weaponized. This seemed like a pretty...
Your story number...
My story number 9.
All right.
Is that news?
It's...
I mean...
I think... the author of this article is Marty Resch, who is...
I don't know him.
Yeah, right. Is the CEO of Now Netography. Is that how I say it?
I heard he had a pig-themed
Netography.
couch in his office at Cisco.
I have multiple colors of pigs in my home office, so yeah.
I mean, the gist is like weaponizing your security infrastructure, right? And you think about that, but Marty really summed it up nicely. I'll quote from the article. He says, as environments grow noisier with context-free security alerts and a constant flood of log data, it becomes easier for attackers to intentionally create distractions that make it possible for them to conceal their activities inside the network.
Yes. That comes back around
Right.
to the beginning of the show when we were
Right.
talking about
Summed it up
SOC.
so nicely.
It's this concept of if I were evil, one of the things I would do is write like a syslog spamming tool, because the problem is that so many SOC tools, SIMs, everything default to the I'm gonna just take UDP 514 unauthenticated, unvalidated, unencrypted, and I'm just gonna like ingest. I'm gonna suck it in, rawr. And then the problem is that if I were a bad guy, not that I am, but were I to do something evil, I would actually say, hey, I'm going to make a little bot or a little agent or whatever it is on every system I gain access to, and it's going to start spewing garbage to intent. It comes back to the
Syslog
top,
spammer.
top 10,
You'd call
top
it
20,
github.com
exactly.
Syslog
Why
spammer.
like the the top 10 versus the bottom 10 lists. Everybody's focused on the top 10, and I'm going to flood the garbage out of that, saying just erroneous data to like everybody in the SOC's going to be like, oh, look over there, and I'm going to be like, I'm going to be over here doing a thing. Shh, don't tell anyone.
I mean, honestly, there's a lot of scripts and C2 that we've written that does just that. A script that just overloads syslog is a great idea. Now that you're saying it like that, we generated a lot of traffic doing, lots of mimikatz, trying to pivot all over the place, like running code, automating for loops, like those things keep people busy. Put the IR on response. They've got multiple patient zeros to deal with, and if we're nowhere near that and we're using good OPSEC and doing things right, like it allows us some respite where they've got that alert fatigue, and our stuff is going to be a lot less malicious looking. So
what we need is like the opposite of the MITRE attack framework. It's like the MITRE on attack framework. What are the most benign log entries that we can create, and create a script to create those to hide our activity? It's like the inverse of the MITRE attack framework.
Yeah. And
I was thinking create log entries that people judiciously ignore, but just with enough noise, the real activities will be lost. Demons crashing or restarting that people like, that's this. I don't care about that. But when in fact, it's all a distractor. Or maybe you get some legitimate stuff. Have their CrowdStrike demons start crashing all over the place, so they spend all their time researching what the hell's going on while they're not paying attention to you.
I think Mark, that's more what you're.
So I was looking at it as twofold. One, you just generate random garbage, but two, because it's UDP 514 for most things, because everybody wants to default to syslog because it's the easy thing to do. All right, so I'm going to lay nascent in the network, sniff your traffic. Oh, there's all this syslog, UDP 514. I'm going to capture that and replay it. And I'm going to amplify that garbage.
Right.
And then I'm going to take, so that's legitimate stuff, but I'm amplifying the crap out of it. So
you're taking Chris Brenton's 1 through 10 scale, you're going to amplify the 1 through 3.
Right. And I'm going to make that 7 through 9 or 7 through 10, and I'm going to be like, oh my God, this thing is, and you're going to go way off in to the right, to the east, and I'm going to be like way off to the west, and I'm going to be like free as a bird. You can't touch me because you're not even looking for me at that point. Like, hasn't happened yet to my knowledge, but well, there you go.
Take that one step further, and some of the stuff that Russia is now doing, and or we're doing back to them, funnily enough, caddy wiper, where you're making a whole bunch of noise, destroying operations, destroying computers. Maybe you're making it wormable, maybe you're not. But some of the newer things with caddy wiper, where it avoids domain controllers and specific lists of computers, so that you can maintain that access, keep your network stack, set it up so that on reboot it wipes it, so there is just no logs to follow. And even if there are logs, like your machine is now got to be rebuilt, so the logs are kind of useless because you've moved on past that. So I think there are two different approaches there that, I mean, we're actively seeing this leveraged and used, and I believe it's Ukraine's IT army has taken some of the malware that was released out of Conti or some of the wiper code, and have built code that they're now using against Russia, which was developed by them. So one of the developers of that released it. So kind of funny.
Yep.
It's interesting to think about combining those tactics to send the blue teams just way off the beaten path to accomplish your goal, right? To
We got
get
a lot of
the 1 through 3s, the set, 9s and 10s that aren't real. Like, it's a total like, oh, I found the attacker. Like, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
I made you think you did.
It's sort of like an anti-honeypot. Like,
yes.
It's
like that's interesting.
Or anti-honey net, one or the other. But
we should all get together and do a startup. This is a great idea because it's deception, but in a totally different light.
Yeah,
like it's not a trap so much as it is misdirection. Yeah. Yeah, deception we think of as a trap. In our scenario we're painting right now, it's more of a misdirection,
right,
than a deception. We're not trying to trap the attacker, right? Where the attacker is doing the misdirection.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So
Misception. Can we call it misception?
Misception.
There we go. We got someone register the domain.
No,
Too late.
Too late. Larry already owns it.
Nope, not it this time. I gotta cut back.
He'll sell it to you for $3,000.
Do you remember when Fishnet Security and Accuvant merged?
Oh, Optiv.
Yeah, I registered Fishuvant.
You registered Optiv? Dude, that was like really.
No, I registered Fishuvant just in case. Didn't turn out so well.
Accunet.
I did. Yeah, Accunet was already gone, but Fishuvant was still there.
Fishuvant. And you have that, don't you?
I do. Still do.
And what are you going to do with that?
I have no idea. Sell it to the highest bidder. $1.
Oh boy,
Christ.
All right, we talked about that. Chrome browser gets some updates. Oh, I thought the interesting thing from this article, actually, because we can talk about Chrome exploits until we're blue in the face, right? But
didn't we just have to update that like the last 5 times in the last week?
And we covered a story last week, Mark, that was talking about like why there's so many exploits in vulnerabilities being discovered in Chrome. I don't think it's because it's the most popular browser, right? I think attackers hand has been forced to find.
No, it's an open source WebKit component thingy.
Adobe killed Flash. Adobe killed Flash,
and so they moved into here's an extension.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do anything with the extension component. But do what you want.
What was interesting though, Google in the Google post about this, Google said many of our security bugs are detected using address sanitizer, memory sanitizer, undefined behavior sanitizer, control flow integrity, libfuzzer, or AFL. I like how Google goes, hey, you're all finding like cool stuff.
Clorox.
Is that we got to drink bleach now? Is that how we get rid of it?
It's sanitizing.
Yeah.
It's
So,
but what I like is Google's going, hey, here are the tools that y'all are using to find vulnerabilities in our own product. Like, go have at it. Like, we're telling you all the tools you need. It's almost like, a company that makes locks is like, here's a list of great companies that are making lockpick sets. Like, that's like unheard of.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool.
This one's electric. just
right? Get the gun and yeah. That only works in the movies, I think.
Yeah.
Does it? I don't know. Tyler?
No, it actually does.
For certain,
it can.
Yeah.
Master locks, especially. And no, wait, was I allowed to say that?
You can say that all day.
Yeah. No, we train everyone that comes here in Security Week how to pick locks, and Master lock falls pretty quick.
Yeah, they're. I thought like the first time I was doing like a lock sport village at a con, and I was like, "Oh my god, I got this thing open!" And they're like, "Yeah, that's a master."
Yeah, pretty much master lock. Yeah. Also, tiny kernel race window was interesting. Anytime you have, if you've got the time, my story number 5, if you got the time to read Google Project Zero posts,
anything from Google Project Zero is awesome.
Wow. I tell you what, like pick up a book that talks about Linux kernel development first. I want to say there was
like do that if you hate yourself.
Yeah, it's not, dude. It's tricky stuff. I remember talking to startups at RSA in the Innovation Sandbox. They were doing stuff with BPF, and we were talking about like the very niche skill set it takes to understand BPF, because you got to understand how the Linux kernel works, and then the Linux kernel has device drivers, which is yet another unique skill set, right? So once you understand the syscalls and the Linux kernel, which takes a good amount of study, then go read the Project Zero post that talk about Linux kernel exploitation. The takeaway, leaving out much of the well-deserved accolades they deserve for the technical details, which I'll leave out. They say what I think is you should take away from this, right, in a general sense, it demonstrates that even very small race conditions can still be exploitable if someone sinks enough time into writing an exploit. So be careful if you dismiss a very small race condition window as unexploitable, or don't treat such issues as a security bug. Then the technical explanation comes after that about how they've manipulated the system to provide a larger window to exploit the race condition vulnerability.
Of course they did.
But I come back to that sounds well and good. There are threat actors who will use that against a certain threat model. There are certain threat actors who will do the side-loading processor bullshit with Intel processors. I come back to
pseudo and policy.
You're looking at the. We do this really, really well in information security. We focus on the outliers. Everybody is quick to point out the outliers. Oh, but there's this one thing that on the full moon on a Tuesday in the 3rd month of an even-ended year, we're going to do XYZ. Okay, great. But meanwhile, it's been 27 effing... Sorry,
you can say
Quadling
it.
Says I can say fucking years.
Yep.
Yes, you can.
Since Microsoft macro viruses are a fucking thing since Concept A in 1995, and I can deliver my fucking exploit with this goddamn macro virus by sending you an email through this compromised constant contact, making you believe that this is something from a legitimate source that you do business with, and presto, I've compromised your system. Well, why do I care about all the complexities of this other garbage if I can just send you the super simple, hey, I made a new Word macro that's going to happily, or not even Word, Excel, PowerPoint, whatever.
Microsoft
don't forget that.
Except for Excel.
Well,
that was the thing, right?
They did do the thing. They did do the thing recently where they finally said, hey, if it's a macro, we're not going to run it. And you have to intentionally change it. Guess how many organizations probably changed it? Why? Because who do you target? The CFO. Why do you target the CFO? Because they have the money. Why do you target the CFO? Because they're the guy who or gal who has
the spreadsheet,
who has the macros that needs to do the thing.
Get to the money.
And you're going to spoof that as if you're the business partner, which you can freely find out who the business partners are from the frickin' website, and you're going to do the thing. That's so much easier. Why would I want to do a processor side loading thing or the other thing? Like, I don't care.
There's some meme in there, but you get the money, you get the power, you get the respect. Like, you get the money, you get the excel, you get the power, and then you get the respect.
Exactly, right?
Like, and I think we unlocked the fuck button. So
so
cross the bourbon threshold to unlock the fuck button.
That was Quadling's fault. My point is that we tend to focus on all these like esoteric things when the simple 27 effing years later still works. The majority of hackers are still going to be like, fuck you, I'm going to just send you a goddamn Excel spreadsheet and I'm going to get most organizations in the world.
My point in what I gleaned from the article was that you shouldn't think of this as esoteric as it is, right? Because I agree with you, Mark. I think the more esoteric things are probably not going to be the things that bite us, right? What keeps me up at night to a certain extent is, what if those things aren't so esoteric? That we have that preconceived notion that kernel race conditions are very esoteric and don't happen. I think what Google is saying, what I gleaned from their article, is that
patch your shit.
Yeah, you get maybe back off of that a little bit and go, okay, when it happens, maybe I should patch it because it's not as esoteric as I think.
Absolutely.
I do agree there are some things that are like, like when the stars align and all that stuff, like the we talk about likelihood and probability and I always mix those two up. Like one of them is like, how often would an attacker come after you with this attack? Then how likely is it that attack would actually work? Right. Is part of the equation. The impact is the biggest thing for me, and I give impact a much higher weight. So the impact of this is going to be really bad. What Google's saying is like, maybe it's not so rare that someone's going to make this attack work. There's other factors, but
true. And that gets back to, you should always keep all your crap updated as much as possible. Like, just update.
Huge fan.
Yeah.
Huge fan. I think while you can't fix and patch every vulnerability in your environment, I think you should set yourself up to be in a constant cycle of don't wait until there is a named vulnerability with a website, a song, a dance, and a logo to go update things. Be in this constant cycle as best you can across your technology stack, which is easier to say than to do, believe me. But be in that constant cycle of updating, because then when something does come up, you've got a lot less technical debt to get you there, right? You may not be patching for the latest thing in this cycle, but in the next one I am, and that's going to be easier because for the past year, every time I make a release, and I did this with our internal software, right? And developers kind of hate me for it, but I'm like, okay, if that means that a release is held up for a day or two every now and again, that's fine. Every time we push a release, you're going to build all the latest Python libraries, all the latest Linux updates into the containers with all the latest releases of your code. And you know what? When shit breaks that's not your code, that's because that Python library was updated to the latest version and they deprecated that function and now you're going to go update your code, go do that. Even if they're not today a pressing issue to do that, if you do that on an ongoing basis, you're wiping out your technical debt in really smaller chunks as you go. And
absolutely agree.
I love that strategy, because when you go, now this Python library is a emergency, we have to update it, we can go, it's not that bad of a change. Whereas if it was a year or two old, we'd go, oh shit, I got to change 18 functions and hundreds of lines of code and rewrite all this stuff all at once and then regression test that all at once. I'm subscribed to the DevOps philosophy of doing it incrementally in smaller releases.
Yeah, and you should be doing the constant Windows updates, especially on Patch Tuesday.
Agreed.
With the other Microsoft products, checkbox.
Yep.
So you get Office and everything else.
And device drivers too.
And device drivers and all the other bits. And you should also then be doing like on Mac OS. Mac OS should be like update everything. And you should be doing Chrome, Firefox, and not Windows specific, but all platforms like Linux.
Mm-hmm.
You got to make sure your Linux is doing the updates as well. Yum apt, or Yum update, Yum upgrade, apt update, apt upgrade, etc. Like you got to do these things on a regular basis, and so automate that stuff.
Right. Yep. Mark, I never asked. This is a good time to ask you the 5 questions.
No.
Yep.
I know it's a perfect time.
It is a perfect time.
3 minutes. 3 words to describe yourself.
Curious, inquisitive, arguably the same, but not quite, and methodical.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Pigs.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
101 Ways to Do InfoSec.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
War Games.
Yes.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive,
dead, fictional or otherwise.
fictional or otherwise.
The Doctor.
Oh, which one?
Any of them, because technically they're all the Doctor.
Okay, fair enough.
Fair enough.
I'm leaning towards David Tennant or Peter Cribaldi.
Okay.
The new girl is also cool.
Okay.
Can't remember her name right now. She's awesome in the other Broadchurch. And so
the Doctor and
Catherine the Great.
whoa,
Fantastic.
Yeah.
those are like the Doctor. That's the first time that's ever come up in 16 years of doing
Right.
this.
Awesome. Well, Mark, it was great having you here for Paul's Security Weekly.
Thank you.
Thanks
Glad
for
to be
bringing
here.
down the bourbon.
Yeah.
It was delicious. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out of here.